This statue means a lot to me. This is Diana and the two hounds. Statue of Diana and the hounds, erected by William Leslie Bowles. It's in the conservatory in the Fitzroy Gardens in the east of Melbourne area. And I've walked through the area. I was quite mesmerised by the detail, and I see this figure come up all too often. A similar figure is of Diana with the arrow of the bow, and this is in the Great Archibald Fountain, which was apparently designed by someone who's also French. I'm not too sure if that's correct history. There's some mysterious fountain was amazingly designed a long time ago. And there's Diana in a different context. I think there's hounds there as well as in the background. You can hardly see them. So this is an amazing theme that keeps turning up, and I wanted people to think about what is the meaning and symbology that keeps cropping up, and why is it that they choose this symbology, and what the people that put this here, why are they so determined to put this in? Just to go in a completely opposite direction, the Capitoline wolf is, which in Rome is the famous Romulus and Remus feeding of the she-wolf. It's an amazing story. Someone called Sean Ross, who does a lot of interesting videos. I don't agree with everything he does, but he's a very interesting character, who made the point that this is probably a hyena, not a wolf. That's a very interesting thing, because hyenas are a matriarchal animal rather than a wolf, which is patriarchal. And instead of the two hounds, and hound is the original English word, not dog, so using hounds, Diana and the hounds is correct, not Diana and the dogs. So Diana and the hounds is the correct way, and then you've got the Capitoline wolf, which looks like a hyena, to be honest, and I agree with him. And then you have the two boys, which could be construed as dogs, and say you've got this inversion in Rome, but you've got the purer version in Australia. So that's just something to take note of. What I noticed is that I discovered that Norumbega could be in Bendigo. I measured the distance from a location near Bega, near the Ben Boyd Tower, so a war memorial in Bega, and the distance from that Bega to the mouth of the Yarra River, where there was another monument of sorts, was twice as long as the distance from that monument at the mouth of the Yarra River to the supposed location of a Portuguese wreck in Warrnambool. So it's exactly twice as long, and it's directly line of sight. And if you go right angles and go half again, that's half the distance from Warrnambool to this statue at the mouth of the Yarra River, and you go directly 90 degrees, you end up in a lake that is the confluence of many of the gold mines that would have obviously shed some of their seams and some of their gold residual into that lake area, and hence that would have been where newcomers could have come and started panning for gold in this mysterious place that's exactly 90 degrees from a point that is a ratio of 2 to 1 from a Spanish tower in Ben Boyd to a Spanish wreck in Warrnambool, and would have ended up finding gold, and then backtracked up the rivers and found the actual seams themselves. And so in a way, Norumbega, which is supposed to be a city of gold, could well be in Melbourne, and that would have probably taken you back to the 16th century. The significance of Geelong as a potential Portuguese area is that there is lime kilns there, which other YouTubers have said could be Portuguese, but the famous Latrobe in Huguenot man who renowned Latrobe University is named after him. He found keys in his daily dealings around the 1840s, which were Portuguese, claimed to be Portuguese, and so it's an incredibly rare find, and that's why people do think that the Portuguese were in Geelong. So that's another thing that gives you some background to the potential heritage of the place. Okay, so I've always been struggling with Melbourne. Was Melbourne completely reset, or was it, or was it not? And was it just maybe a few Portuguese leftovers, or maybe a few French whalers and a few bits and pieces, and or was it an actual township that was invaded by the British and then leveled and then rebuilt and sold out in 1835 to 1839 as a new city? I can't work out, and I've got so many conundrums, and I just want to show you all the various things and then tell you that I'm still confused over the Port Phillip district. So I want to go through some photos. Here's one of many photos. Of it in probably in 1864, that you'll see that there's different flags. There's a flag on the left, which could be Bengali or could be Irish, it could be anything, and a British flag, and another flag in the background. So there's no Australian flag, obviously, at this time. And this is from the 1860s. This is less than 30 years from inception, and obviously it's a bustling town already, so which is quite an amazing achievement. You even got a centre, like public toilet or something in there. So quite a fast rate of expansion. I just want to go through some photos, which always makes me wonder. It started in 1835. Land grants set out in 1837, and people starting to really move in 1839. And I'll go for that in a sec. Here's just some general photos. 1869. Don't know what date this is. This is a courthouse in old Supreme Court. Here's a very old photo. I think this is from the 1850s or 1860s. Note the flag on the left. I don't know which street I forgot. Sorry, I didn't archive it. This is Melbourne, 1855. So that's less than 20 years from inception. So that's quite a lot of development already. That's two-story buildings. That's highly impressive. On the other hand, this is 1842, and look at that. This is just Brunswick Street. It's just the backwater of nowhere. This is from 1854 to 1855, apparently. And this is one of the earliest photographs. You can see the background is just all paddocks, but they've somehow out of nowhere got a high street. There might even be a substantial bridge out in the top left-hand side. So very strange. This is around the 1840s. This is Dight's Flour Mill there. So that's quite impressive. That could be the architecture there. That could be pre-British. That might be a legitimate pre-British one. It's hard to say. The exhibition centre in the 1860s, I think it is. I found this particularly amazing. This is in the 1860s. Look how old things look already. I know things were dusty back then, but that's a lot of development. It's another image of 1861. Wellington Parade from Spring Street, Melbourne, 1861. This is the Courthouse, St Kilda, 1859. St Kilda. So we're already in St Kilda. It's already 1859, and the expansion has been mind-blowingly fast. Look at that. This is the Port Phillip Club Hotel from the 1840s or around 1840. That's only a few years afterwards. So wow, that's pretty fast. Another interesting. This is 1858 in Beechworth, which is in north of Victoria. So you can see that this is 20-something years after Melbourne, and Beechworth is way north of Melbourne. Like, it's a long trip, and yet you've got this established old, house with worn out this and worn out that. I mean, it's quite a lot of, old arches and just everything. This in itself looks rough, but it's 1858. This is 23 years after inception. So I don't know what to believe of that. So we have photos. We got the photos going back to all this, we look at the photos and go, how do they do all that? But you see, there's so much documentation by people recording their time going here. There's massive publications. There's significant amounts of diaries, the recollections of people going to this place, looking at all the sites, and they describe it in detail. their journeys to Port Phillip in 1839 and onwards, and they talk about at length the nature of the people going there. The first, you can read this. Talks about the arrivals, the buildings. There's a section on buildings. Melbourne in 1839, placement of the very pip going back to the days of its founders. That hardly got their tents pitched, and away they go, and they start building all this stuff. There's references to two-story of the allotments. There was two-story buildings. Houses were of brick, some of one, and a few two stories. Others were weatherboard, all sorts of stuff. And they're talking about considerable detail and going to the hotels and drinking and meeting the squatters. That's just one publication. There's multiple. I succeeded once as a person's recollection of seeing all sorts of people in the Mornington Peninsula, including people acquainting themselves with the Aboriginal women and the wealthy young men coming to find their fortune. And it's quite a detailed account going all the way back to the 1830s. There's many publications that go on about this narrative. And so you'd think that, I mean, these are just individuals. And so there's enough actual written material to state that potentially that it's true. The Melbourne and the general colonies were started around 1830s. That's what so much of the work said. I actually contacted the Royal Society. I contacted the Royal Society and asked them, and they were very helpful, to give me information about the original names for um, Melbourne. And it was interesting because the words, and I'll go into this now, and this is what perplexes me quite a lot, is that the original names, there's several names for Melbourne originally around the 1830s. One was Bear Brass, one was Dutagalla. Dutagalla is still a place name today. One was Bear Port or Bear Herp. I wanted to go into a bit of detail about the issues with these names. But before I do that, I have been to the State Library in Melbourne. I have looked at John Batman's writings as best as I can tell. It's ambiguous that he started all this in 1835. If I was just to read over a few items here, in May 1835, he began his examination of Port Phillip County with the view to discover good pasturage. But even then, he goes there as if he's a foreigner. He goes there looking around the place and notes there's only 177 people settled there. And they're just living in rough tent, shacks and that kind of thing. They referred to the place, Stewart said the place was called Bear Brass, right? This is particularly, why would he call that Bear Brass? Bear Brass, which was a corruption, they couldn't work out what Bear Brass, they called it Batmania, it had all these different names. I think Bear Brass is a big clue to perhaps who was there before. But once again, we have this very significant record that's in the government records that says that he went there was 177 people and they called it Bear Brass or Dutagalla. Okay, so the issue, so what do these names actually mean? And were there only 177 people there? It could well be. So then, therefore, we have to figure out the timeline. Okay, so was it called Bear Brass? What was it called Bear Herp? Because there's other names. There's Bear Brass, there's Bear Herp, and there's Bear Port, and there's Dutagalla. There's a few other names, but they're the main ones. Bear Brass, Bear Herp, Bear Port, Dutagalla. And I think that could tell me that the type of people that were here already. Now, Bear Herp. Herp is a very unusual word, and I've been looking extensively in the Creole languages, the English Creole languages, and I cannot find herp anywhere. The only reference is that it relates to amphibian in the original etymology. but I can't get anything. So the only closest thing I've got is harp, which I'll go through in a minute, and herp, which is the family name for the Dariata or Dariata kingdom, which goes back and finishes up in the 12th century. I think it starts in the 6th century. And that's, of course, in this neck of the wood. That's, of course, in this neck of the woods in that part of Scotland. It's a Gaelic kingdom, and this whole Gaelic thing, and then you have to think about what is Gaelic. Uh, what is Gaelic? What is Gaelic? Okay, people think Gaelic is Celtic. I don't know. I mean, the history is so distorted. I mean, in old maps, France is Gallia, but but the French generally refer to as Wales as using the word Gales or Galet as well. And the name for New South Wales in French is Nouvelle uh, Sud de Gales or something. I don't know the French for it, but this Galet is often Gaelic, but the context changes. So France was called in some maps Gallia all the way up to the 17th century AD, but the French generally referred to as Gaelic as the Welsh, and this gets us into the confusion around kingdoms and that sort of thing in the Middle Ages, and that would require some analysis. So I wanted to bear that in mind as we think through this whole problem of Bear Herp. But I did find another clue that I wanted to discuss about what links this together. The word herp, Bear Herp, which is the name of, as a Port Phillip. Let's think about this. So herp could be harp, and that could be the simplest way to say it. And going back to this site here, the Gaelic word port nowadays means a tune. Well, that's strange. The Gaelic word port means tune. Well, that's interesting. But in the 17th century, it seems to refer to a specific kind of instrument music for the Gaelic harp. Right, so harp is related to port, which is related to tune. And a harp could be related to harbour. So we're getting this unusual language where we know in some of the old English and some of the old Brythonic languages that the port people have always spoken this double language and rhyming slang and that sort of thing. And so they might have created a herp and a harp and a port and a brass and they had their lingo embedded. So that might give us a clue that we're dealing with a kind of a Gaelic peoples, which isn't specifically French in the context that we know, right? So we'd have to get into Old Welsh and what's called the Angevin kingdoms of the Middle Ages, and it might be a bit more interesting in that sense. And so that might be the closest clue to who were the original people in Port Phillip prior to the British. How big was it? Gets really strange, and I'm having trouble trying to get my head around it. That's why we start looking at maps next. This is one of the earlier maps from the early 1800s. It's where we get, this is a Frenchified Napoleon-esque map where it has Gulf of Josephine, Gulf of Bonaparte. And it's everything seems to be named. They seem to have known everything. Port Phillip crops up here, Western Port where the British were. It all seems to be known before 1835. Let's go through some more maps. This map is probably the most interesting. This seems to be from around 1802 or something like that. I think the guy was David Collins, and he did his own journal of everything else, and who knows. He did it and like from 1798 to his diary of the first settlements. Look at the names that are here. You've got the usual Dutch names. That's you got Van Diemen's Land, but if you look closely, you've got I couldn't find a map better than this. This is not really good, but it's got something like Good King Bay or something here. So it's not even Port Phillip. Port something Bay there. I mean, I don't quite even, I can't even read it. This is interesting because I don't recognise some of the names. Some of them, I mean, some of them I do, but yeah, undiscovered coast. Right, well, that's interesting. Van Diemen's Land. You've got Hobart. I can't even make this out. Portland Bay. Oh, anyway, if someone could take a look at this map, it's the David Collins map from his diaries. Probably one of the more interesting ones. There's multiple maps that talk about. This is probably the most interesting of them all. One of the most. This is about 1817. You have Port Lincoln. Now we know that Adelaide was discovered around the 1829, 1830, but Port Lincoln's already a port in 1817. Port Phillip's already a port. Western Port's a port. So obviously these are active ports before 1835. That's obvious. It can't be something else. These are called ports because they're ports. They're not going to be a port. They are a port. And if this is in 1817, they're ports. They are now, there it is, 1817. It is a port there and then straight away. There's no question about it. So it's as clear as that, and that you just have to accept it. So that's how advanced it is. I could go through several maps. I don't want to get too into it. I just want to demonstrate that tells us quite clearly that it's a port. That's quite clear that Port Phillip was active in 1817. And with Dutagala, I referred to this when I was looking through the Batman reference historical documents I got from the Royal Society. It was not just Bear Brass's Dutagala, and in that original document, Dutagala was spelt Douteergalla. On this map here, the modern spelling is Doutagalla. Now, I've been thinking a lot and trying to research if this is indigenous or if it's a European pidgin. We don't have all the languages from the late Middle Ages and the early modern period as well as we would like. For example, the Zaphatic languages, which is French Hebraic, would be a good contender for this sort of analysis, but I don't have the full glossary of that. Reason why I mentioned that language specifically is that it's a Hebraic, and Duta would typically mean second in a Hebraic related language, and Gala or Gaia would be a pidgin of Gaia or Gallia or Gaul or something. So little France would be my translation of Dutagalla as an example, but it would be little Gaul or little Gallia, or little something. Going back to once again is that France was called Gallia, we have Galicia in northern Portugal and so forth. We have these we have these place names that are generally Gaul related. So I think that's the best interpretation of Dutagalla as a contender, which is alongside the other names I mentioned, which is Bear Brass, Bear Herp, Bear Port, etc. Very Gaelic centric names. I discussed in a previous video how I had evidence that Melbourne was settled before 1835, documented by the British themselves. Hume did an expedition from somewhere in New South Wales, Goulburn or somewhere, and all the way down to Port Phillip overland. And as he's approaching, like somewhere between Geelong and Port Phillip, he comes across Indigenous people. And this is his writing. While with us, they pointed in the direction south by west, intimating by signs that white men in ships were there and engaged in storing timber. Representing this by seesaw movements, they described the sailors and vessels under sail and made use of some English expressions. This left no doubt on our minds of the presence of white men then or recently in the directions pointed to. Okay, and so on the 8th of December, we started homewards. This is in the same vicinity, and it says here, so convinced were we that the report was that a cannon that one and all agreed to turn back to Geelong. So they, in the distance, they heard a cannon somewhere in the vicinity of Port Phillip. Now, why would you have cannon fire if you had no settlement? What was the cannon fire about? What was these buildings? What's all this stuff going on in Port Phillip? There was there was a settlement apparently in 1803, 1804 that failed and went further south to Tasmania, which would have been more difficult to deal with. Yet, and apparently it was just uh, Indigenous people all the way to 1835 when Batman turned up. So clearly there was people there around, and the time of writing for this, I should have mentioned initially, is that Hume's expedition was in 1824. So that's the dating of this record. Just want to draw yourself attention to this map. This is a strange map that is apparently from the 1830s, 1839, and it's a description of the Port Phillip area. If you look at it, I've mentioned this before, if you look closely at it, first of all, the name's called Nurm, not Port Phillip, and Nurm is probably pronounced Nurum, which is probably the part of Nuremberg, which makes a bit of sense to me. But all the names here, you've got Dawson, Gardner, Ryeri, Varna, that sort of thing. So, yeah, these are probably the original settlements. These are probably people's settlements, and there's a Melbourne here. Williamstown. I think that this map is showing you what's already here, what was already there. These are the original settlements. And the fact that they've called it Nurm, which is probably pronounced Nurum, would probably make sense. Sort of mention that again. It's a good find, this one. But do we have any? I mean, what I want to do is I want to find the smoking gun. I mean, Pentridge Prison is another thing. It's built in obviously a medieval style, which is unusual. I mean, look, there's a lot of buildings were built like this in the 1800s for whatever reason. I mean, they just did it. But so it could be. I mean, it could be built that. There's little things like there's little things like the floor plans for the penitentiary is basic. You always get hardly any floor plans. You get this is it. These are the plans that I've seen. I've not seen anything else. The story goes is that the convicts built the outer walls, and the rest of it was built by hired labour. So you've got the most skill and difficulty done in the outer walls, building a medieval fortress or castle or something, and you have that going on. And honestly, don't know what to believe. I don't know whether this was made in the 1800s and they they used convict labour, or they took up all the prisoners and they made them build this stuff. And I mean, there's so many old buildings. And at the beginning of the video, I showed you some of the video of some of the older buildings that I thought were unusually old for the architecture being quite archaic. I mean, and even the first photo I showed in the very first beginning of the video. Here's Cook's residence, which was built in like 1740 and transported from England over to Melbourne for whatever reason. Look, they probably validly did it, but why? It's just strange. So my argument is this: is that so you have multiple aspects. You've got government records. You've got people saying it started in the 1830s. You've got 1824 proof that there was people there doing works. You've got massive developments that are out of sync. You've got colloquialisms that go back to Gaelic times. You've got maps showing all sorts of things, and so it's hard to know. But I just wanted to explain three options or theories about how history could be rewritten. On the top red scenario, you have a scenario where, say, you have Port Phillip or whatever, and the colonists arrive at whenever 1700s. Then, say, the British will invade. Let's say 1804 is just a rough guess. It's a good year for an invasion. 1803, 1804. They wipe everyone out. They leave it barren. and then they start rebuilding, and then the buildings are repurposed, or there's new buildings. That could be one option. And this is probably what has happened many times. The second option below, you might have, say in Sydney somewhere, you might have free settlers arriving, but the British have already set up an office in Parramatta and maybe another office in Sydney Cove. And the free settlers are going berserk, doing their own thing, spanning out all the way out west, Wild West, not caring about anything, speaking to the local Aboriginal people, marrying in with them, sort of finding ways to get legitimacy and what's called squatter runs, which are very big. And then over time, the British take over. They start doing allotments. They try to take land off people, and then they rewrite the history. And the free settlers don't have their history; they just get absorbed. So many squatter runs will be just their history will be wiped out. They won't exist. Same with it. But the third scenario is probably quite likely as well, and I'll probably say this is for Adelaide. You have free settlers arriving, then some British will set up an office at the same time, or maybe 20 years later, or something like that. So the free settlers are arriving, they're all there working together. There's a British East India Trading Company office, that sort of thing. But over time, you've got secret societies developing social networks and that kind of thing, and then you'll have like a manor or a farmhouse, and the people suffer some strange bad luck. Maybe it's orchestrated bad luck, and then they lose their land, and then over time the land gets repurposed, and then a historian down the track, say in the 19th century or 20th century, will go back through the records, and the records they'll say, okay, well it wasn't such and such a Gaelic person. We're going to say it was the second owner. Like they won't go back to the original source. They'll pick the first person that started paying the British rates, and they'll say that they're the first legitimate owner. So they'll do it one farm at a time, so that no one notices that the history has been written, because it's done on one manor or one house at a time. It's not done in one foul swoop. And so as people's family histories, and you've got World War One and all that sort of thing, people lose track of their genealogy, and they eventually forget their history. They don't keep a record of it, and eventually it gets lost. So these are things that are worth thinking about, start thinking about in terms of the three possible options. And anything else you think is happening, I don't think it's as clear cut. And with Port Phillip, I have no idea. I suspect it was a port for a long time, and there was mining going back a long time. I suspect that it wasn't that popular compared to South Australia and Tasmania, which I'll cover in other videos. But was there actual buildings before then? There's a lot of allotments going on in Port Phillip that I've seen. It looks like that it was truly reset for 1835, and if you went there, you would never know that. You would never detect a previous culture. And so I think that, but it could have been one before 1804, and who knows the dates. I just needed to probably show you one last. I just want to show you one last thing. This is an image I found in a courtyard out front of the archaeological department in I think it's the University of Melbourne. That is one of these skull and bone societies, Melbourne Skull and Bone Society, I think it is, and that was in the early 1900s. Why they put that photo right out the front of the Archaeological Society? Look, I think that you can get help and find out some more information about these, about what's going on here. So I think you can spend more time and try to help me work out what's going on here. I don't quite understand. I think it's very challenging, and I hope that I don't want to just conjecture. I want to find a smoking gun. I actually want to find the evidence. I don't just want to conjecture and play around with ideas. I wanted to also talk about other bizarre things like Arrowdale Mental Hospital, which was a huge mental hospital. It looks like a fortress out towards Ballarat or Bendigo. I can't remember where it is, but it was a massive mental hospital back in the early days around the gold rush, and you could never imagine that many people being mentally ill that far back in time. There was hardly anyone there anyway. Things like that that are strange in Victoria. So please provide your comments, and I'd like to get some more leads. Thanks very much.